I'm excited to have you here. So it's today we're going to talk about resumes and cover letters. I think it's a hot topic this time of year, particularly due to the fact that many of you may be focused on jobs or internships or fellowships for the summer. We have upcoming virtual and in-person career fairs in the next couple of weeks. So this presentation is going to be focused on best practices of resume and cover letter design, and it's focused for undergraduates and graduate students. And we'll go through some best practices of organization of those documents, both on resumes and cover letters. And at the end, we can open this up to questions. So let's get started. So this is a slide share with every presentation that I give here for career services. And I think it's helpful to understand is that career planning is most definitely a process, and we all fall along this continuum at any given time. So as you're thinking about working with career services, wherever you may fall on this line, we are happy to meet you where you're at. But today's conversation is around your marketing documents, key fundamental documents that are critical in most circumstances for pursuing opportunities. So I think it is fair to say that many of us feel, myself included, the development of a resume can be frustrating and overwhelming. But we want to help you understand is that resume writing is most definitely a skill, and it's something that can be practiced and developed. We also want you to be thinking about the fact that we don't expect you to be experts in resume and cover letter development. We want you to be experts on yourselves, and we in career services want to offer you the tools, the resources, and the advice to help you customize these documents, and also have templates and tools so you don't have to recreate the wheel and build something from scratch. Should you want to, we'll certainly be able to advocate for those pieces. So we're trying to take the pain points out of resume development so we can focus on creating ideal documents for you. I do agree with this sentiment that your resume is the most important document you'll ever own. This is actually by Martin Yate, which is I think it's the most famous career or resume development book available. The only caveat to this thing that I'll make is that I believe that LinkedIn is probably the third leg of this stool when it comes to building your resume and your cover letter. And they're very different documents, and we are not advocating that you have to push for a social media strategy as part of your career planning process, but just recognize, in addition to the resume, the LinkedIn profile is a preferred tool for recruiters and hiring managers to sort of evaluate, source, and hire talent. So that's another conversation. There's certainly resources we have available, but because the modern resume, as it is the initial entry point for most opportunities. But there's certainly one way to do it, and we're going to speak to all the possibilities when you're designing them. So that is 6 seconds. That is the amount of time that you have when a hiring manager picks up your resume and decides if they're going to keep reading, put it in the no pile, or potentially the maybe pile. That feels like an amazingly small amount of time. But the catch on this is that if we know that that's the behavior of people reading these documents, we can craft tools and frameworks that are more likely to get read and more likely to get read in the way you want them to. So you get 6 seconds and then another 6 seconds until they get to the point where they understand who you are and they want to reach out to have a conversation. The other thing I'd like to mention is that resumes, and they're biographical, but they're not necessarily biographies. We're using the term resume today, and I've been using CV interchangeably for this particular conversation today because they're becoming hybrids of each other. Traditionally, CVs have been focused on academic roles and oftentimes clinical roles in healthcare. But the reality is that a long 3, 5, 7, 8, 10-page document are just not likely to get read. So what we want to make sure most people realize is that the resume is not a biography. The resume is an advertisement, and it is an advertisement designed to get you a conversation, an interview. So if we can think about this document as a way to sort of to announce yourself and sell a product and drive connection, you can think about the tool as how the visual appeal and the information is so valuable to helping people understand why you are unique and interesting and the right candidate for a particular role. So let's talk about what the best examples, what the best resumes are. First, as I would say, the best resumes are interesting. You have about 6 to 10 seconds for an initial impression. Like I just covered, there's the opportunity, if we know that that's the behavior, you can craft a document that meets the expectations of the reader and exceeds them. And it's designed to tell a story and create interest. So it's not just about the facts, it's about what you did and how you did it, to be able to explain relevancy and interest, and to be able to connect, to connect the dots for the reader, to make sense of all of your background and why they're reading that document about you that day. And it's a combination about 4 things, and we'll get into those in more detail, around formatting, which is what it looks like, content, which is what you've done, messaging is articulating how you did it, and flow is how information is organized on a page that makes the most sense for that particular role. Because education may come first, it may come in the middle, it may come last. Where do your skills go? Academic projects may come here. So being able to think about the fact that there's a lot of flexibility and creativity when it comes to organizing information on a document. This is a image of a resume, and there was an organization doing market research, and they brought in several hundred recruiters and hiring managers to look at sample resumes. And what they were looking is putting eye tracking software to see where the recruiters and hiring managers' eyes went on a page in that 10 to 20 second range. So what information were they trying to discern quickly? So what you have in front of you is sort of a heat map cluster of where people are looking. So in traditional terms of a traditional resume, they spent almost, for this, gaze study, these recruiters spending almost 80% of their time reviewing 6 things: your name, I'm going to say contact details, where you currently are working, where you were before, dates, and your education. That's your 6 to 10 second window. What we're saying with a modern document is that we want to help you create a document where they are going to get to the content and the messaging more so than just trying to find information, because we want them to have context about you. If they're spending too much time on trying to connect the dots on dates, that's a wasted opportunity for them to be focusing on why you're valuable. The best resumes are accurate, and I suppose this goes without saying, but even the most desirable candidates, it is often the case where if there are typos or errors, you're likely to get put in the maybe or more oftentimes a no pile, even if you're the most desirable candidate. And the reason why is that this is, for better for worse, is usually an individual's primary document about them focused on sourcing work. So if there are errors in the document that you're using to present yourself for an opportunity, and it's incorrect or has information that isn't accurate or typos or mistakes, it's likely to impact eligibility. One of the caveats to that is when writing information in a document, you don't necessarily have to write in complete sentences. So the opportunity to write in fragments. So there is some flexibility, sort of communication style wise and grammatically, but just recognize is that always, in our opinion, certainly, having us work with it, there's software tools that can help evaluate grammatical aspects. And we're always advocates for having somebody else other than somebody in career services or maybe somebody outside of your field to review your document, because they may see some things that you hadn't recognized or your peers had. The best resumes are relevant. So they're often filled with industry vocabulary, and they're keyword searchable. So the idea is that the resumes with the most relevant words are most likely to be found by recruiters and hiring managers. And that makes a lot of sense, is that when you think about, for all of you thinking about your search strategies for opportunities, how many of you, if not all of you, are using some form of technology to do that? You know, a job board or LinkedIn or a targeted job board or Handshake or some other tool. Well, when you're submitting a resume through an organization's applicant tracking system, which is the ATS system, that's the platform that usually you submit your application through. There's usually technology, machine learning, algorithms, and AI in the backbone that are parsing out your resume. So they're looking for context about experience, but they're also looking for words that are consistent with the role. So making sure that when you're creating the document, that you're observing the language that's being used in the position description itself and how to embed that into your document. So you are more likely to rise in the top of the search parameters for the particular role because you have the words consistent. And it's also helpful to understand is there may not be words, especially for exclusively the position description, but also industry vocabulary. You know, you might be applying for a role in healthcare, for instance. You know, understanding the landscape, if you're working in marketing or strategy or business planning, talking about length of stays and DRGs and, payer strategies, whatever those vocabulary words mean. Again, this is where careers, when we're supporting students with resumes and design, we also spend, efforts understanding industries and sectors and can help you define what those those terms are. So you're using the words about the competencies, but also the vocabulary of the type of things that are done within that space. This one is, I would say, a controversial, but differing opinions. But from having been a recruiter historically and hiring students in the past, one of the things that I think is a valuable, if it makes sense in the document, is I think some of the best resumes are titled. And by title, I mean, if you are applying for a specific position, an internship, a fellowship, a job, a co-op, etc., whatever the title of that opportunity is, that goes at the top of the page under your contact details. And there's a reason why. So a generation ago, you could submit an application with your resume and cover letter for a job opportunity in an envelope, and somebody at an organization is likely to open that envelope and look at that document and may try to understand how to make sure somebody fits into that role. Now, because of technology, applying to jobs is less discriminate, so it allows anybody to oftentimes apply for any job. So you can have roles with hundreds or thousands of applicants for opportunities. And when you submit your resume for an opportunity for an organization, you lose control over that document. That's in their possession. They can print it and share it. So if you think about it from capturing a document for the first time in your hands, that piece of paper could be about anything. What we're saying is if you're applying for a particular role or type of role, is putting the title narrows the scope of the focus of what that document could be to a new reader. So what it does is it sets the expectation for the reader of what to find on the page. This document 5 seconds ago could have been about anything, but in this particular case, this is a physician assistant role. As I mentioned earlier in this conversation, these are examples of best practices, but they are not directives. Everybody has unique cases and circumstances, but what we're trying to say from a readability standpoint and to stand out in the piece and to make it easier for the reader to discern what they're going to think, but also putting a title, if it sets the expectation for the reader of what to find in the page. So now you've already made your life a lot easier because they have a frame of reference from which to look for information that you're going to put in it. And I think that estimate of about 80% of CVs and resumes don't have it. So that may be that you may have all the most desirable qualifications in the world, but this may be a way to sort of connect dots. And I think the best resumes are accessible. So next week we'll have a presentation on job, internship, and fellowship opportunity search strategy. But recognizing is that having a document is great. Being able to be accessed directly or passively is helpful. So thinking about as you're creating your searches is, should I create a profile in a large job board like Indeed or Monster or Career Builder, or should I have updating my profile on Handshake, or creating having something on a targeted job board, or putting on an industry site. The idea is that if there are places where others are searching for your type of skill set in your document, you can have the technology or the platforms be a place where you can be found more easily. So, and that's great for bandwidth, because the challenging part of any sort of opportunity search is that it's usually the limiting factor is us and our own time. So what I'm saying is that, making your documents available in places where you think audiences will see it and may contact you, I think is good practice. So those are some of the best, so I would say sort of best practices thinking about the document. There's certainly more, but I think those are big headlines. Let's talk now about the structure of the document. So how do you build on this piece? We'll be going through examples today. There's certainly more detail. The hope is that in a better understanding of the possibilities of what this document can be and some best practices, but also recognize the resources that are available, and that part of the reason our career services team is here to help with developing those documents, or at least giving you tools and resources should you want to develop them on your own time, that you can build them on your own time. So as I mentioned before, your resume, it's a marketing branding document. It's an advertisement, and it's showcasing your skills and experience and likely potential. I think that's inferred, but that's what it's trying to do. Organizations are, they're hiring for roles. Are you competent for this role? Do we think you're valuable and can do the job? But also, are you interesting? So thinking about, and we'll speak to some of the nature of the types of information that can go into this document to make it easier. So format, as I mentioned before, is what it looks like structurally and visually, what the initial appeal is. The content is what you've done, but that messaging piece is interesting because it's showcasing how you've done things. So being able to measure or showcase how things are relevant. So speaking exclusively in just specific facts is difficult, because messaging is about context, and context is something that organizations are going to need to move forward in a process for hiring somebody. And then I mentioned flow or information organization, and the creativity and flexibility that goes into that. There's a lot of options. So this is a position description. This actually exists. This is actually open right now, as a matter of fact. But as I want to mention, when you are crafting your marketing documents, this is important to remember, is that you are customizing that document to that role. Now, you may be looking for similar roles in similar places, which would mean there's likely less customization if let's say you're looking for market analyst roles in insurance, for instance. There's probably going to be a strong consistency of information and messaging in that document. But let's say you are looking for multiple options or targets. Maybe you're looking for marketing roles. Maybe you're looking for sales roles. Maybe you're looking for finance roles. So those roles and those documents will be structured and messaged differently to meet the expectations of the hiring managers and recruiters that are looking for them. So what this is saying is that when you're looking at a position description, this is critical. So understanding, what are they asking for? So I would say in this particular position description, on the left-hand side in the box are the expectations and requirements for the job. So what the role is and what kind of responsibilities this person is going to have. So they're going to be showcasing the type of words they're going to be using, but also the expectations. So, and oftentimes in a position description, not always, but often, when people are bulleting out expectations about those roles, they're usually hierarchical. So the top bullets are likely a little bit more important than the ones in the lower space. So just to keep in mind about how you're framing that document, what are they actually, how much of this job is the first 3 bullets, and then how much is the other pieces. So that's helpful for deciding what information you should be thinking about putting in your document. And then your qualifications also can have information. So the box on the right-hand side have information about the nature of the role, or do you meet the qualifications for that role? Because we want to be thoughtful is that, we encourage people to apply for all sorts of jobs, but the more focused and targeted your document is to that role, the more likely it is going to get read and move you forward in the process. Being generic, I believe, is dangerous. So because so many people can apply to so many jobs, is that if we're trying to prevent the case of somebody getting your document, and let's say they get this document and you've got 10 seconds, what we are trying to avoid is having a document that somebody gets in their hand, reads, draws a conclusion, and draws an inaccurate one. Well, that could be a function of how the information is organized, but a lot of times maybe you haven't targeted the roles in the most specific ways that are leveraging your best skill sets. So just being thoughtful that your resume is a customizable document and should be thought of it that way. There is no singular format. These are just the 3 I put up as examples of how information is structured. None of the examples we're sharing today are, again, we're not promoting any style or framework. You can design information on a document in a variety of different ways. But so just being thoughtful about those aesthetics, and we have templates and examples, available on our website for those of you, including a resume guide, particularly for undergraduates, to be able to look at examples of how these things are framed. Some of the information shared today will be in addition or supplements to some of the examples that you'll see, and some sort of modern best practices. So if you don't see some of the things we talked about today, that's okay. They might be things you may want to include in your documents as you're building them. So we're thinking about design, then we're thinking about content. This is where I think it gets really interesting about structuring a document and sort of getting over preconceived notions. So we're trying to avoid generic. We're trying to make sure it is very easy for somebody to understand the document. And we're trying to organize it in a way that's very easy to find where that person's been valuable, usually putting the most relevant information further towards the beginning of that document. But as you see on this particular slide, the types of information you can put on a resume, and this is in no way an exhaustive list. So you can think about your professional experience or work experience, but your education. If you have honors and awards, it may be useful. Memberships of organizations, leadership, community engagement, and volunteering experience or service experience, professional development, if you've been teaching or mentorship experience, if you've got posters or presentations or patents, internships you've done, applied academic projects, etc. So the reason to bring that up is that we want a document that's relevant, and recognizing that your experience can be drawn from a lot of different areas. It doesn't have to be something you're paid for to be valuable or useful. Oftentimes, academic projects, especially in experiential learning opportunities like we have, how often they're not added to current resumes, even though they're great ways to showcase practical project-based skills that have deliverables and outcomes. So thinking about how to leverage your existing coursework and the projects you do in your examples. The other thing, a myth to dispel, is the length of the document. There has a sort of a traditional expectation is that this document should be 1 page. And I would say that is not a guidepost that we tend to adhere to. And the reason is exactly explaining what I was before, is how many pieces of information you can put into a document like this. So the idea, if it's relevant, we put it into. So recognizing is that unless explicitly articulated in a position description about a one-page resume, I don't believe you're beholden to that. It may be the best process or aspect or the best way to demonstrate your information, but just remember that you are not relegated to that boundary. The next few minutes, I just want to go through a couple highlighted examples of a physical resume and speak to these pieces. Again, where this is not a validation of a particular format or a particular structure, but I think visualizing some of the things we're just messaging can be useful. So contact details at the beginning are important. So you can have your name, you can add things like you can add your pronouns if you prefer. If you have as a graduate student, for instance, if you've completed a graduate degree, you can put on your credentials like an MS, an MBA, or a PhD. So your name should be big and accessible. But underneath that, I think people ask, should I put my address on the resume? And I would say a good rule of thumb is either put the largest city or municipality to where you are in relation to what you're trying to do. So the idea is if you're thinking about working in the Boston area, I think putting Boston, Mass is fine. Or you can leave it off. But should you put your address? And I would say no. And the idea is nobody needs to be, especially now where transactions are doing this work is digital, nobody needs to go to your front door on Google Earth and see where you live. And this is, not only is it just, it's a privacy issue, but it's also an equity issue, is that I don't want somebody looking up my home and having a biased impression of my living space in relation to what kind of character I might have as an employee. So being thoughtful about that, and you can just, oftentimes you can just leave the location off, but let's say you wanted to move to San Francisco. You can put San Francisco on this document, even if you don't live there, because it's letting the audience know you either are there or have intentions to be there. Then I would have a phone number. I would have it in sort of US standards, so I usually leave the 1 off the beginning. So it's the national code. And then with email addresses, I think there's 2 options. I think 1 or 3. As a student at Tufts, I think it's fine to use your Tufts email. When you leave Tufts, I think you can either have a customized email address to a certain brand or a Gmail account. And the reason why is, again, bias is part of this. So if people see an AOL address, they think it's my parents. If they see a Yahoo address, they think it's me. But for Gmail, takes out age and background because it's ubiquitous. So just something to keep in mind as you're building this up. The one thing that this doesn't add, but I would include, is if you have a LinkedIn profile, it's customize a URL to your name and put it in the document. The reason why is that if an organization you're applying to gets your document, and especially if it's digital, if they read your resume and like it, they're going to read your cover letter. When they're finished with your cover letter, they're going to go to either your LinkedIn profile if they can find it, or Google you and then do the other thing, and they're going to do it in 5 minutes. And because your LinkedIn profile is something more other than these pieces, because it's for more information or how you structure, you can create a different narrative, you're just making it one step easier for them to do what they're going to do anyways. So then we talk about job title, which I mentioned. We have an upcoming career fair, and you might say, well, I'm not applying for a particular role, and that's okay. But let's say you may be interested in certain opportunities. So you may be interested in marketing and sales and public relations. You can substitute the types of roles or industries in that space. So if you're going around to the career fair, it doesn't mean you're exclusive to those. It just means when they're looking at your document, they're in the brief transaction that you're having in these conversations, that they can see what the intention of is this document, but you can speak to other pieces. So then education, and I'm an advocate for keeping education section very simple, is that this is more, a lot of times, is a checkbox, in that if there's information you want to explain, it can be done elsewhere in the document. So as a student at Tufts, I think where you went to school, the location and the dates on the same line. This happens to have the GPA, and that's okay. And then having your degree on the next line. So they're going to be, where is it, what school, where was it, when were you there, then it's the degree and GPA, and if you got honors distinctions, put it there. The only thing, what I've added here is, in addition, is that if you've done a thesis, a capstone, a final project, you may list the name of that opportunity, and it's purely marketing. Is it just tells the audience that you may have completed a comprehensive project that may or may not have been responsible for degree requirements over the course of your academic career at this institution. In this particular case is putting on relevant coursework, and I think for the undergraduate community, this is oftentimes showcasing, the types of classes that you take and that might be relevant to their role. This can be put somewhere here, and these are just examples, but oftentimes it might be its own brief section. So there's options. And then in this particular case, there's a little bit more detail around honors or something that's written or another thesis that's being done. So there's a lot of flexibility here, but really what we're trying to accomplish is that the reader wants to know the basic details so they can get into the content of the document. What I like about this document is that we're trying to make sure it's not generic. So the idea is that if just listing, and this doesn't mean it doesn't work this way, but thinking about the fact that you may have relevant experience that's in connection to these roles, or you may want to showcase different areas of specialization or expertise or industries you've worked in. So this document could just have a chronological list of work. And in this particular case, though, it's saying, we're going to break it down by expertise. So this particular role is saying, this is the healthcare education administration experience that I have. And here's how I framed it. Here's some marketing experience that I've had. So what it's saying is that your document doesn't have to be purely chronological. In fact, most of the time these days, they become hybrids. And what I mean by that is that it's functional in the fact that information is curated in specific places that make sense for the reader, so they understand it makes it faster to understand what the things you've done, which is really useful. So, and it also, but the functional place, and so it's chronological within the function. And again, there are examples of this. So this is just making it easier for the reader to say, I don't have to read through 4 jobs and then draw a conclusion. You're doing it for me. It doesn't always apply to everyone here, but it's a best practice. Then there's things in this particular about like leadership, community engagement, and service. Having a skills section and thinking about skills are things that you can measure, but recognizing is that you can qualify where those things are. If you see here, you may list out, your Excel experience, or your Tableau, or your Canva experience, but you can also break them into competency-based areas. So you can not only tell them the skills that you have, but the area in which they're used. And that just sort of lets the organization know that you know how to use the tools in the capacity that they're built. And then just going up to one piece in the higher education section under Tufts University, you'll see after Tufts University, Medford, Mass, and the dates, between that and the title of the role, there's a 1-sentence description of the organization. And I'm an advocate for putting this into our documents. So the idea is maybe somebody isn't familiar with Tufts. Maybe you're applying to a role on the West Coast where they're focused on other schools. This is a way to tell the audience sort of what that organization does. Size doesn't matter. In this case, Tufts is a 12,000 student, private non-sectarian R1 research university. But what it does do is it gives the role a place. So people can visualize, if they know what the organization does and they can see your role within that organization, they are more likely to visualize you in that role. And if they can visualize you in a role because it has a place, they're more likely to visualize you in their roles. So again, not a directive, but a nice best practice. And the other thing is sort of framing around, if you're looking at job profiles and describing putting your job titles underneath, sometimes adding department name next to it, or lab. So you may have worked as, you may have done a marketing analyst role, but for a certain division, or a consulting role in a certain place. So recognizing you can add more context and framing. And then finally say, like, when we're talking about bullets and design, as you'll see in examples, that on our website, is that your bullets are about measured outcomes. It's about action So the word, it starts with action words. So what did you do? Who did you do it for? And why was it valuable? And then potentially what is the outcome? And recognizing this is a general way of framing it. But if you can understand is that we don't necessarily just want the list of what you did. We want to know why that thing was important. And number of bullets, the more relevant and the closer to the top of the document, probably the more bullets. But I would avoid things like 10 bullets for a job. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but sometimes we put descriptions into, you can describe the role and then fewer bullets. So there's a lot of flexibility to these pieces, but a well-organized document. And there are going to be times when you don't have to have all your experience or all your experience or expertise in a document. It doesn't always have to fill in every piece. We're just looking for what's the most relevant. For those of you, undergrad and graduate, just as an example of one that was for a graduate student, this is just a highlight where you start seeing the types of categories that come into play and how information can be organized. When you're seeing, all right, there's education experience, but look at the research, what publications and posters, academic projects on the second page, leadership roles. So this is just an example. You start recognizing all of this is relevant. This is an actual document that existed. And this person did get many job offers. So it is just a frame that organization can depend on what the target is. And all of this can be rearranged depending on what they're looking for. And one last thing I'll mention is that in addition to the job title, and this is true, I think true of most people, but again, this is not directive because it's a personal opinion with some fact-based backing it up, is on the top is, in addition to having a title, is thinking about putting an executive summary at the top. Think of the executive summary like you would think of an abstract for a document, where the idea is that it's information about you that they want to know, and the rest of the document backs it up. So having a title of a role, listing out competencies, so those things in sort of grayed out at the top. Those are oftentimes responsibilities or competency things you can do that are directly related to the role, and they're coming from the position description, or they are examples of things that are consistent with that role, and that you're just telling the audience you either know how to do or have expertise or exposure to them. And then consider 2 or 3 bullets about your background and experience to break it down. If you have 5 years of applied experience in their industry doing certain things, you can quantify time. And if you quantify time, a lot of times people think if your expectation is you're telling the truth, they're not going to spend their time trying to match dates. They're going to spend most of their time focusing on content, which is exactly what you want to do. So just highlighting this first box up top, and then the second box in the middle is an example of, if you've got a complex job, or even it's not, is that you can describe the job, and then your bullets are describing outcomes within that job. So this is a lot of information, variety, and pieces. We don't, again, expect you to be experts in all of these elements, just recognizing the variety that's in them, and that we can speak to those elements. The career services team has expertise across most industries and backgrounds, and we work with recruiters and hiring managers about their best practices, so how those things are curated, so you don't have to be an expert in all of those things. So this is sort of here to how we think and what are best practices, and then how can you take this information to build your own documents. So what you see in front of you, just for those of you who are considering a visually based resume, if you look up modern resumes in a Google search and do an image search, you're going to see a lot of visual resumes that are, they may have logos, they may be columned, they may have pictures or frameworks. I think the visualization of information in a modern document is incredibly useful. What I will tell you is there's no existing standard for development of these tools. And what I would say, if you were interested in curating one like this, we have examples and frameworks of them, but I would always have a traditional document first, because the issue is submitting a modern document in a modern format, even though it makes a ton of sense. The hiring manager may be of a generation that's not ready or has not had experience reading that document. And if they're offset or off put by how the layout looks like, it could be a missed opportunity. So this is just some general information that we are aware of the visual presentation of resumes. It is trending this way for a lot of industries and sectors. We've already seen it in some marketplaces, but it's still in its infancy. So that is a large breakdown of resume design development from for undergraduate, graduate, and professional settings. As we see, there's a lot of variability. So the resume is a tool, and the resume is usually the first point of contact for showcasing information about you to the audience. The resume is a historical document that showcases experience and expertise. It's a history document. It's whatever, it's today and before. The cover letter is different. And I'll say with a cover letter, unless explicitly articulated by a position description that a cover letter is not required, I would always write one. Because you don't know what the differentiating aspects are between, you may have two perfect candidates on paper, but this is the opportunity for you to describe where you are interesting and valuable and ready to do this job. Not only could it be, it has been and I think a lot of career services can speak to this, has been a differentiator and has gotten people into opportunities that where others have lost them because they didn't present their background in an interesting way. But I think cover letters are very much like resumes, is that it's also a skill. And like cover letters, there are very few times when we are asked to create a document that says, why me, why this job, and why right now? And very, very rarely do we have opportunities to write or talk about ourselves. Why am I valuable and why am I interesting? And those are the things that the cover letter is trying to do. It's trying to tell the audience why you, why now, why this job. And it's trying to communicate why have you been historically valuable and why are you of interest to them or interesting to them. We have frameworks and examples of these too, so we don't expect you to have to recreate the wheel again. Is that seeing examples of frameworks, and there is no singular way to craft a cover letter. There's no length limitation. People ask me, like, does it have to be one page? I would say the same thing that my history teacher in high school said to us, and we asked how long should the paper be for that class, for writing for a certain topic, and this person would always say sufficiently long enough to cover the topic. That is an infuriating response, but a very accurate one. And I think the idea is if the information is well written and relevant, it will get read. I believe it's the same way with a resume. If it's well designed and thoughtful and relevant, it will get read. So I think it gives flexibility. But when it comes to content development, there's a lot of flexibility. So what are, when you're writing a cover letter, what are best practices? These are absolutely targeted. So these are specifically for roles, being aware of what that organization does and how it aligns with your values. It's not, you can tell when they're generic. When you do your research and look at the background of why why does your experience directly relate to this role? Or how are you translating it for them? Or why is your interest aligned with what they're trying to do specifically? Now, the more targeted your jobs that you're looking for, the less customization of your documents because there's more consistency between them. But they are still unique in some capacity for each opportunity. And they're going to showcase your value and your unique experience. And recognizing that you can draw on your experience from your life. It doesn't, just because you work somewhere, got paid to do something, or it was an academic project, or it can be a leadership or community engagement. I mean, there are ways to glean experience and expertise that don't have to be in a professional setting. So just recognizing that we recognize that you can draw from creating a narrative around why something is of interest to you. And this is true, but definitely ask for help when you need it, is that they're not necessarily very easy to write. What we try to avoid is, again, you don't have to recreate something that's already been created. Using tools and frameworks and templates as guideposts, I think could be very, very useful. Don't be generic. Like it's focused. Spend the time and energy on this. It doesn't mean, and it's, when you're doing job search strategy, where you focus your energy and your time, be thinking about, you may have, tier 1 targets for your opportunities. Those are highly customized. Maybe if there are ones that you're not as focused on, but you're trying to get a few more applications out, maybe a little less specific, but I wouldn't just be boilerplate, because it'll, at best it's neutral. I don't think it necessarily enhances if we can tell that the investment wasn't made in that document. That is not to induce fear or anxiety in you in creating these. Help, and resources is what we're trying to provide. And then don't forget to proofread. Is that, again, errors in context. This is where avoiding fragments of information for the most part. So, and using grammatical tools, and Grammarly is helpful. There's other resources. Work with this is where working with the Star Center is helpful, and working with writing tutors who are developed in these areas, it can be used very, very useful. So again, when you're sort of preparing these resumes, we'll go through examples in a second. Thinking about your experience, target your jobs with specificity, looking at representative examples, not just ours, like having peers or having professors that have examples. Recognizing that patience can be helpful. We do our best to try to help you streamline it and create documents, but you're trying to create a promotional tools to present to audiences that want to hire you. It can take time to develop that information. And keep your drafts. Like, you never know, like, information from one resume may different from another, but I would always keep some measure of all your content somewhere that you can draw from. And again, have people read your documents before they go out. So the next few examples are just different organization structures for cover letters. And it's not all of them. This is more example of a traditional cover letter, where it is the initial introduction is quick. When you are writing a cover letter, if you know the name of the person that you are writing to, you can dear in their name. If you don't know the name of the person you're applying for, the best practice, or one of them, is not writing to whom it may concern, because it's too generic, is considering writing dear hiring committee or dear hiring team. So there's an expectation that that's where this is going. Then that first paragraph, I'm an advocate for doing two things: introducing you that you're applying for this job, and giving me a sentence or two or three about why you are interested, relevant, and valuable in relation to this job. So that's a very common. Then oftentimes the next paragraph or two is either what you're doing currently, and then what you've done historically, or it can be directly related to this role. So this is direct in the tone, is that I have worked in this capacity in this area. I have 3 years of experience doing these particular things in these ways, and across of these, I've developed these competencies in addition. And I know I'm speaking generically, but what it's saying is it's not telling you more about why they're doing it. It's sort of like, I'm telling you what my competencies that directly relate to this opportunity. But it also indicates after is like, I recognize you're also looking for these things. Here's my management experience. And then your final paragraph, it doesn't always have a paragraph form, is, it may be around soft skills, and maybe around why you're interested, but it's asking for the conversation. And we have examples of all of these to be able to resource. But it doesn't have to be in direct form. This happens to be an example of the document of actually my cover letter. And I tell people, doing this professionally, as that even though I do this professionally, when I have applied for external positions professionally, I work with a professional resume and cover letter writer, because it is very, very difficult to be objective about your own brand and what you've done and what you've developed and created. So this is working with somebody else and help me synthesize more of a structure and sort of the information I wanted to curate. So in this particular draft is saying, my resume is covering a bunch of these things. Here are highlights that you may want to think about and capture them categorically, and then the final paragraph in the second page is a little bit more about, I'm interested in working with this team for these reasons, and I have some of these soft skills, and I'd love to talk about it. But at the end of the day, it's getting somebody to information like this. This is relevance. This is why I'm relevant and valuable, I think, and this is why I'm interesting, and this is why I hope you want to solicit the conversation to talk about it. But another example, just to keep in mind, is it doesn't always have to be about the job. So in particular, this one is more of a personal example. I would say it's unique in the development of cover letter words and specific, In this case, this was a clinician where their resume was very specific to the role, so they didn't have to do a lot of explaining. And I'll make sure this document's available to everybody, and I'll attach it to the chat before everyone leaves, is that this is talking about this person. So one might ask, why would a man with a passion for the outdoors, love of Montana, and a happy marriage in the Mountain West move to Boston? It's a great leading sentence. You're going to read the next paragraph. So this is talking about the type, this person's emphasizing their qualities in connection to this role. I'm just showcasing this to demonstrate the flexibility, and that's certainly not saying this is going to be the most utilized potential tool, but your narrative, like why you do the things you do, for those of you who make conscious choices to study what you do, that may be a motivation or a value associated with that. That motivation and value is something you may want to articulate to a reader as you're communicating why you're investing your time and energy to apply for that job. Might not just be for the skills that you use, but the thing that they do or the values that they value or adhere to. So again, a lot of flexibility in structure and examples. I will say a helpful tool that you can use when creating your documents is called JobScan. JobScan is an applicant tracking system emulator. So think of it as the tool that it's a emulating tool that is the same technology that companies use to match your resume or cover letter or LinkedIn profile to that job. So you can create a profile, and I think you have 5 free scans. You can scan the document and it will give you feedback about that document. I don't spend a lot of time adhering to the score. I think it's more about the data that it can share. It can talk to you, it can give you formatting guidelines or recommendations if you meet those criteria. But what I do like about it is it does keyword frequency analysis. So it'll say maybe there are words the position description is using that you didn't see, or you hadn't embedded in your document. This is saying if you haven't embedded, you might want to consider getting these in your document because it's more likely to get picked up. So what it is, it's a secondary tool to help you to make sure the content of your document is consistent with that role and whether or not it matches. And there's a lot of additional functionality and I think it's $20 for a premium resource, just a helpful tool to be thinking about. So from the career services side we have a website. It's where we have resumes and cover letters, CV, writing samples, portfolios that you can you're able to access. We have a resume page with a quick guide and resumes, bullets and an action verb directory. So like how to create your bullets, and a full resume guide about how to build them up, including a full resume guide that includes a resume checklist. So some of the best practices to think about as you're creating their document. So, and these are available for download online. So we are trying to make sure that we are here as available resources to work with you directly, but we also want to make sure you have tools and resources that you can use on your time to develop what you need. So we're located at 740 Dowling Hall on Boston Ave. So we are excited. We understand it's an interesting and amazing job market. There's incredible opportunities and possibilities. We are here hopefully to be a partner in your process of developing and curating your documents for the future.